Presentation is the third in a series. We've done two before this one, and we've got one more coming up next week. And just to introduce ourselves, my name is Leslie Farnsworth, and I'm the CEO at FrogDog, and been through, we're now at over 20 years in business, and so I've been through a number of different crazy crisis times, never a global pandemic, so I guess it's a first for everything, but I'm hoping to bring to bear a little bit of the experience we've had with other crises and give some actionable tips to folks to figure out how do they adjust and adapt and continue to thrive despite what's going on. Maddie from the FrogDog team is here, and she and I are the ones who've been teaming up to do this presentation, so the series of presentations. Maddie is the sort of head of digital everything at FrogDog, and I oversee the strategy side and a lot of the messaging side as well. So we're hoping to bring both of those things to bear on these conversations. And today's topic is a little bit different than what we've covered in the past two seminars. In the previous seminars, as part of this series, we covered how to immediately address the crisis, right? What do you need to do in the immediate thick of things with your marketing and your messaging? And we also had discussed in the second seminar as part of the series with the bare bones, sort of the basic marketing you probably already have underway, provided you have something going. How do you need to adjust that? And what do you need to do and not do at this time to make sure you are still covering your marketing bases, right? How do you change that accordingly? This time we're assuming those pieces are put into action. If you did not attend those two previous seminars, I will send an email after this with links to our YouTube channel that you can watch those at your leisure and get a feel for what we recommend to do, because we don't want to be too repetitive for people who have come to more than one of these seminars. But in this topic, we're going to talk about, if everyone remembers the first seminar, we said, look, there's that immediate term, then there's the short term, there's the longer term, and then you'll finally get to the long term. Well, right now, we're assuming you're in that short-term planning, which I think everybody is, where you're on a week-to-week basis, looking at what needs to happen in terms of marketing and putting that plan together. But hopefully you're starting to also look a little beyond the week. Those weekly plans are running, and you can start to think about that longer term. Now, not long term, let's be aware, but what longer term things could you be doing to still get return on investment for your marketing during this crisis period, right? So what could you be doing? What kind of plans could you put in place? What kind of tactics could you employ in that longer term period to still be marketing effectively? And this crisis is relatively unique. So how do you market to a self-isolated social distancing world, which is the world we're in right now, right? Given the nature of this crisis, it could feel like for certain types of businesses, hotels, restaurants, even certain B2B types of industries, that marketing of any kind becomes almost impossible, right? Or what's the point if you're a hotel or you're a restaurant, you're not open, what's the point of continuing to market? We can't emphasize enough, as we talked about in our previous two seminars, you should not go dark during a crisis period, no matter what business you're in. So if you can employ some of the tactics we're going to talk about today to stay in contact with your target audiences during these difficult times, you will come out ahead when these times pass. And we promise you, if nothing else, we can promise you that these crazy times will pass eventually. So that's our topic for today. Our topic for next week will be how you can work during this time period to position your business for a post-crisis rebound. So that's next week's seminar. I am going to mute somebody else who's typing furiously. As a note, you can unmute yourself at any point if you'd like to sort of chime in. I will say what we're going to try to do in terms of format here is cover the best practices, get through those at the front end of this call, and then we'll answer questions and have discussion toward the back end. So if you have an idea, if you have a question, if you do have a thought, feel free to either write it down, or if you want to put it in the chat section of our meeting today, that's the little conversational bubble in the horizontal menu bar at the bottom of the screen. If you want to click that and type in a question, type in a comment, go for it. We will get to those on the other side of the call after we've done the presentation. We'll have time to hear a little bit about what's going on in your world and make sure we give you any specific actionable advice that'll help you as you navigate this tempest we're going through all together right now. All right, so first and foremost, again, although you need to adjust in any crisis period, this crisis has a particular flavor. So adjusting marketing during the COVID-19 crisis was an important caveat, right? Because whether your audience is another business or your audience is a consumer, you will find that all of them are inside their homes right now, right? Even if they're still working, they're not going into an office by and large, right? They're at home the majority of the time, if not all of the time that they're not going to a grocery store, right? So this will, by nature of this crisis, change your marketing in the near and the immediate and the longer terms, just because it has to, right? So even if it was a different type of crisis, that may not be the case. In this crisis, it is the case. So what do you need to do? As we talked about in our first seminar, you've got to immediately pause. You've got to immediately assess what's going on and develop that short week-by-week marketing plan. And as you're seeing the waves subside, some of that immediate up and down, the pendulum swinging back and forth with emotions and moods and news events, they eventually start to calm down just a little bit, and you can develop a longer term plan. What we're talking about today is that longer term plan. Not long term. We're not talking about 2021 or even Q4 2020. We're talking about that longer term plan. If you're looking at what you can do over the next month or 2 months to continue to communicate and market to your target audience, what does that look like, right? So as we discussed a second ago, you can't go dark with your target audiences. No matter what's going on in your business, even if you're temporarily closed, you need to still communicate, right? So look at your marketing plan, see what needs adjustment, make those adjustments, and begin to think about, beyond the bare minimum tactics we talked about last week, beyond the typical bread and butter marketing things you were doing to just keep some kind of activity happening, what else could you be doing to reach your audience, right? How do you reach a self-isolated world? And sometimes it can feel almost impossible, but there are options and there are opportunities. And some of those are more obvious than others. So let's talk a little bit about what those opportunities are. Let's talk about how you could employ them right now and some of the things that have changed about those tactics in today's world, right? So even if these are things you already had underway, the opportunities have shifted. So the most obvious are things like social media. We'll talk about that first, right? So when you're thinking about social media right now as a tactic, as a way to communicate with, as a way to market to your target audience, it's helpful to think about it in two different ways, but complementary ways, right? There's the paid social media, right? Whether you're promoting a post on LinkedIn or Facebook, or you're placing an actual advertisement on Instagram or any of the social media out there today, right? Those are two opportunities for you. Some things to think about as you consider whether you want to go paid or non-paid, or when you want to go do both, which is really the best practice even in good times, is to do a little bit of both, is that you have increased user traffic to social media sites. So what we're seeing, data that keeps getting published, is that all of the social media platforms, it doesn't matter which one, whether it's TikTok or tried and true Facebook, they're skyrocketing in user traffic right now. They're completely inundated with people on the platforms. Users are there constantly, a lot more than usual. And that's great in some ways, right? It does, however, mean that each post is gotten a lot less visibility than it used to in the past. When the social media algorithms have more options for what to show people, they've got more people posting pictures of that fantastic cake they made with their hoarded flour or their cute Zoom video happy hour snapshots, whatever that is they're posting. These social media platforms have a lot more to choose from in what to show people than they used to. So that means that every post that's put out there has a lot less visibility than it used to have. And so if you're just going to go with unpaid or non-paid or organic, or kind of that sort of posting on social media platforms, that is fine, but you will need to expect a diminished return on that time investment than you used to have. In our conversation last week, we said you need to increase your frequency. You need to be posting more often to get your voice heard out there in social media right now. That continues to be true if you're doing only really unpaid, non-paid types of posts. It doesn't necessarily apply quite as much if you're paying. So if you want to promote a post or boost a post or pay for a display ad of one type or another, you will get the input and the visibility you need to some extent, because that's how these social media platforms make their money, is through advertising. So they will give preference to people who are willing to pay for visibility right now more than ever. So keep that in mind, right? So you want to probably have a little bit of mix of non-paid and also paid posting on social media right now. And you also will find that it's a completely different wild, wild west than it ever used to be with ad costs on social media. In some places, we're seeing all kinds of things. Maddie and I both read marketing news and media and reports and analysis on a daily, or if not multiple times a day basis at the moment. And you will see in certain places, you can get an incredible deal. You can get more visibility for a paid post on social media than ever before. And then in other cases, you're getting, less because there's just so much competition for advertising in certain categories. So keep that in mind. You might need to play with different options. You might need to see what's available, what's possible, what the costs are, do a little bit of cost benefit analysis, seeing what it is they're going to charge you for what you want to do and whether or not you feel like you can get the exposure you need. It takes a little bit of experimentation there, but it is worth looking into, seeing what you can pay reasonable fees to get right now. And that's very business dependent, very dependent on what you're sort of promoting and what you're saying and what you're doing. But it is something to look at, both sides of that spectrum, paid and non-paid. Email marketing is something we also talked about last week, right? You must continue to stay in touch with people. You probably have two sets of lists, right? One list is your own list. You've created it. It's your current customers, your former customers, people who've interested in your product, your people you have relationships with in business, right? That's your contact database, right? That's a very important resource right now. That's a huge asset to your business right now. You also have the opportunity to advertise. So if a publication out there puts out a weekly or a daily newsletter, if they have a website that people are going to read the news in your industry or the news in sort of the interest area of your target audience, you can actually buy an ad on their email newsletter or in their email newsletter or on, kind of an email blast that they're sending out to their list for, depends on the publication, depends on the amount of reach you want to get, but that's another channel to really look at right now. People are at home. People are reading email. I do think you need to be aware that in the first couple of weeks, I think all of us on this seminar can relate. In the first week or two after this crisis hit, my email box blew up. I had so much email from so many places, some of it completely valid and legitimate because it was helpful and it was needed information from my bank or my lawyer or whatever it was. And some of it was from businesses I had not bought from in 5 years and didn't know who they were for a minute, right? So be aware of all this, right? You've got to monitor your target audience's moods. You got to make sure if these are people you haven't talked to in 3 years, this is probably not the time to initiate a conversation, or if you do, really be careful about how you do that. Take into account the overall tone in your industry, the overall tone with your target audience. Really try to monitor their moods. Do that social listening we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where you're looking at what the people in your target audience are saying in the public sphere and in the social media worlds, and really figure out what makes sense for email marketing. But without question, for the list you own, for the email list, your contact database we just talked about, you should be sending out a minimum, even in a crisis period, of one message per month. Cannot emphasize that enough. Do not go dark. If these are people you have a contact relationship with, they've either signed up for your email newsletter or that you know them personally in your business world or through your sales activity, they need to hear from you. Maybe not in the middle of the initial part of the crisis, but fortunately we're kind of getting a little bit into a new, hard to say routine, but a new temporary, highly temporary routine right now. This might be a good time over the next week or two to do that sort of soft outreach to your existing list. And it could be worthwhile as you think about that longer term plan in terms of getting in front of your target audience in a bigger picture way, looking at the publications that people in your target audience read and seeing whether or not you could buy an email ad in one of their email newsletters or in an email blast from them to their list. And what you are likely able to find right now is that you're going to get better rates than ever for that type of advertising. So for email marketing advertising, whether you're buying an email blast or you're buying it at an email newsletter, it could often be in the past quite expensive. A lot of your competitors, I assure you, are pulling back. So this is a very good time to do the research and see what kind of bandwidth and what kind of traction you can get through buying email marketing advertisement. Digital display advertising, right? This is one of those like, what? What's the difference with this? When we say digital display advertising, we mean those ads that show up on websites, in publications online that target your audience, that play in the middle of videos, at the front end of videos, at the end of videos, on apps people are using. If they want a free version, they often have advertising to help pay for that. On games, on their phones, and on their computers. Social media platforms have display ads. Those are the actual like graphical ads. They don't look like a post, as well as paid post type, promote a post, boost a post types of promotions. So think very carefully about those right now. What we're seeing is that just like with social media, across the web, videos are getting a ton of views. YouTube is blowing up right now with people just watching videos on YouTube. Games are popular, especially a lot of these social games right now. There's platforms out there that people are playing games with remote friends via their computers, sometimes via their cell phones. We are actually seeing a change in behavior. So it tended to be quite often that people were more often than not advertising or accessing their social media accounts, accessing their YouTube videos, which is a social media platform, but a little bit different in feel, accessing websites through mobile. Mobile was just ever on the rise in terms of activity. We're now actually seeing a big turn toward the actual computer. So be thinking about that as you look at this, right? The types of things that people were doing on their phone with apps has changed. Now that they're at home, if they have a computer, they're using that computer to access all of these things. So there's a really great opportunity when it comes to really nice display ads with your messaging, an image, a graphic, any of those types of things. Something to think about here, though, and I think a lot of times people think about pay-per-click as, oh, well, that's great, right? If people are searching for something, my ad can come up, and if they click it, then I pay, but if they don't click it, I don't have to pay. I think assuming that pay-per-click right now will serve your business goals would be a fallacy, because how people are using search engines and what they're searching for and why they're searching for it, what we call user intent right now, has changed immensely. It is absolutely different right now. People have completely changed the ways they use the internet, even down to what we talked about earlier, where they're not using their phones, they're using their computers. That's also different. So your target audience's behavior in terms of how they're accessing the internet and what they're doing on the internet is different right now, but also their mindset is different right now. So whereas people in the past might have searched for beauty products or a new software system for their office or a better way of managing sales, new sales techniques, those kinds of things, they aren't looking for that right now. It's just not what people are searching for. So if you are paying for keywords and paying per click for Google ads, let's say, or Bing ads or any of these types of things, it doesn't mean you have to pull back on doing that if you're already doing it. Because you aren't paying if people aren't clicking necessarily. It may not get you where you want to go. So be aware of that, right? You may not get the same results you had been getting in the past from just pay-per-click, because people are changing the way they're searching right now. Another thing to be very careful about with pay-per-click, if that is something you're doing, and I think it's important to say, we're talking about digital display advertising, which is very different than pay-per-click, but if you are continuing to do pay-per-click right now, be very vigilant about your keywords. What was historically true about certain keywords is not true now. Something to think about, because in the past, and a lot of times when you're buying pay-per-click advertisements, they'll use historicals. Oh, on average, people search for this keyword X amount of times a week or X amount of times a day. That's great, but if that data was pulled a week ago or 2 weeks ago or a month ago, it's not accurate for today. Things are changing too fast. People's worlds are changing. So Be very careful and vigilant about keywords. Also be very careful that you don't fall into a trap. Shared this story on a previous seminar, but it's a good one because I think it's just what people aren't thinking about right now. There was a sort of a story going around in the marketing circles. Somebody had a client that they worked with that did face masks in the beauty kind of way, right? So something you'd put on your face at night before you went to bed. So you'd have glowing skin in the morning when you woke up. And they had a pay-per-click advertising campaign going for that. Well, as we all know, this was this weird crisis in the sense that it's slow build, and then suddenly it was a crisis. So overnight, this face mask pay-per-click campaign was performing just fine. When people searched the word face mask a month ago, it meant a beauty treatment, a beauty regimen. In almost overnight, the meaning of search mask in terms of user intent on search engines changed so much that this client was out thousands of dollars in pay-per-click because they had put in some keywords that seemed completely reasonable, but the world had changed. So if you are doing pay-per-click, be very careful about what you put in there. Be very careful about making any assumptions related to historicals. And I would highly recommend, if you don't have someone you're working with on your pay-per-click, if you might want to hire someone to come and look at what you're doing so you get actual return on investment for that activity. But by and large, unless you're already doing pay-per-click, be looking at digital display advertising. Those are those beautiful ads you can get across the web that will follow people around if it's remarketing, or just appear if it's not. And they get a lot of really good traction right now. You're going to capture a lot of eyeballs. And you actually also, except for on certain things like social media platforms and videos, you actually might be able to get a pretty good rate, especially when it comes to publications that your audience is reading. Publications are hurting a little bit right now and are needing ad dollars. So, but they're still getting readership. So it's by and large a really good place to get a deal if you're looking for opportunities to advertise to your target market that you maybe hadn't thought about before. So here are a couple tactics we're going to segue to that you might not have thought about, right? I think everybody, when they think about, oops, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Pause. Before we get to the things you hadn't thought about, let me pause and talk about digital content development. Because all of the things we just talked about, especially if you're going to get into social media and paid posts, you need to create content. When we talk about content, we mean articles, white papers, case studies, videos, graphics, slideshows, infographics. If you're going to do social media, and we're not talking about just the display ads, you're going to have to start creating content to feed that social media or video or whatever else it is you're doing. So you need to create content at this time. And it's a really valuable way to use your website, a very valuable asset you probably already have, to keep it alive and functioning and fresh for your target audience. It's something you can send people to through the email marketing we talked about. So create content that gives your audience what it needs and seeks during the crisis. So keep in mind, what do you do? How is that affected by this crisis? How are people in your target market affected by this crisis? How can you help? What can you create that would give them some additional intelligence, some support, some information, some valuable tips and tricks and tools? But also at the same time, be thinking about some of the longer term tactics, longer term types of content you could be creating, that as you put that on your website, as it continues to gain some longevity on your website, it'll get you more goodwill, get you more attention, get you more love from the search engines as we all come out of the crazy crisis we're having right now. So I think that's important to think about as well. Can't really talk about all these tactics for delivering all this stuff without also talking about the content that fuels all of it, right? So if you think about all of that, and you think about not just content that you could create right now that will help your audiences, which is very important, but also be thinking about longer term content, you'll be able to have a longer lifespan in general with all the marketing you're doing. So now let's talk about the tactics that you probably aren't really thinking about, but are hugely valuable right now. And you actually are going to get potentially a lot of good traction you were otherwise going to miss. People tend to think digital today, right? Even in normal times when we're not in the middle of a global pandemic, everyone's just like, digital is where it's at. Yes, digital is where it's at. Digital is very, very important. But I will say, as somebody who's been doing marketing for many, many years, including right now, traditional advertising and traditional sort of marketing tactics in general have an incredible amount of traction. People tell us over and over again, oh, I don't think that works. I don't think that works. And then we show them the results and they quickly change their mind. traditional marketing tactics work incredibly well these days, and they are going to work even better during a crisis period like the one we're in right now, right? That doesn't mean they're accessible to everybody, and let's talk a little bit about that, right? Traditional advertising methods include television and radio. When we say radio, we mean terrestrial radio, FM XYZ, or AM 123, but also digital radio, the Pandoras of the world and things like that, but also podcast advertising. Traditional advertising can include things that will absolutely not work right now. So flyers, posters, billboards. This is not the time for that sort of traditional advertising. And we're hearing horror stories of large billboards in major metropolitan areas going blank, which just never happens. And now it's happening because just everyone's pulling all of the out-of-home advertising that's been going on so well for so many years. But right now, traditional advertising that hits inside the home is doing incredibly, incredibly well. And there's a lot of space that there didn't used to be. So you can get better deals than ever on television ads and radio ads, and also podcast ads. I'm grouping those all together. Now, I understand that if you've never created television or radio ads, this is a difficult time to create them. It's not something that all of us have done. You may not really know how to even go about it. Television, it's probably impossible. If you've not created an ad, you don't have raw footage around to do a TV ad with all the visuals and the graphics and everything else, is probably just not realistic right now for most companies. However, radio is surprisingly accessible, and it is voice on a microphone. Often even the voice on the microphone of the host doing the show, who is very socially distanced inside his or her booth. So you actually can find that a lot of different types of advertising for radio and podcasts is very, very accessible to you right now. People absolutely are listening to all of this in their homes. They're watching a ton of TV, whether that's satellite type subscription, internet TV, or actual TV as well. And there's not a lot of competition for that ad space. So if you have the capability to find a way to do television and radio ads, you're going to get a really, really, really great deal right now. If you're currently doing them and your messaging still applies, you could probably just amp up your frequency. That means run the ad more often for maybe even the same amount of money, or certainly only an incremental amount more, which is huge. And if you have a TV ad already running and you can take the raw footage and change it a little bit, that's fantastic. If you don't try TV, but maybe still consider radio, because you can probably even call the stations yourself and say, I'm willing to do a radio ad. I'm fine with having the DJ record it. But this is the messaging I want to have communicated, and you might get a really fantastic deal. Or podcast ads. Podcast ads are a really incredible way to get a very, very targeted audience, because podcasts can be much more narrowly focused than terrestrial and satellite radio even can be. So you can get to a podcast that has a very focused audience for your target specifically, and probably get a fantastic deal right now. And it really may only involve you giving them some talking points and having the person who runs the podcast record that. So I really recommend thinking about it. I know it sounds intimidating if it's not something you currently have running, but it is worth consideration, because you're going to get incredible coverage, incredible reach, incredible possibilities when it comes to frequency that was often completely inaccessible to most companies even just a few weeks ago. But something to look into today. Also, direct mail. This is again, another tactic. People are like, oh my gosh, direct mail, who reads the mail? Well, actually, surprisingly enough, in a regular day, direct mail is incredibly effective, has such high conversion rates on an average normal not crisis filled week. And that's only going to be more so the case now. You may think otherwise, but everyone is stuck at home now. Nobody's on vacation. Nobody's going into the office and coming home and not checking the mail for 2 weeks. People are looking at the mail pretty regularly. And if you can get home addresses for your target audiences, consider using them. Also, if you don't have home addresses for your target audiences and you don't see a way to get them, you actually can work with, there's very large national corporations out there that do direct mail, and they won't give you their list, but you can rent their list from them and pay to have them print a postcard or a letter or whatever kind of medium it is you want, and send that to their list. even if you send a regular letter right now, even if you send a postcard right now, it's going to have a lot more effect than it usually would. This is still expensive. Even a bulk rate cents postcard is not nothing when it comes to budget, but it will get you a ton of traction. People are really looking for stuff right now from any direction. Could be their mailbox. That's fabulous. People have pulled back from direct mail. I don't know the experience of everybody on this call. We could talk about it, but by and large, people are not getting as much mail as they used to right now. People have held off from sending it. People who typically send direct mail regularly as an advertising tactic are not sending direct mail right now. So there's a lot less noise in the mailbox. It sounds funny to say, but when people used to just get tons and tons and tons of mail, a lot of it was junk, that's not so much the case now. So there's a lot more opportunity to get a lot more attention from your direct mail. The budget may be by and large the same, but you're also going to have people at home looking for anything to look at other than their family members or their cat. So you're in a good place to get some attention. Just keep in mind when you do that tactic, direct mail is taking a lot longer to get delivered right now. It used to be on average when you worked with a mail house to send out a large amount of direct mail, it was about a 10-day average for the bulk mail rate from the send date to the receiving date. We really would recommend you're probably looking at more like 2 weeks or even longer for a direct mail, or sorry, sort of an email or direct mail, can't talk this morning, direct mail item that's at bulk mail delivery is going to take even longer today. So as you wait for results, keep that time frame in mind. But it's a really, really good and useful tactic if you have the budget. And if you don't have the budget to do some massive direct mail thing to 20,000 people, it may not be realistic for everybody. That's okay. Think about writing your own letters. If you have a home office printer right now, this is a really good time to print off 50 letters, stamp a stamp on the top of them and send them out, because they're going to get a lot of really good traction right now. People are also going to see it in a totally different light and totally different way. So doesn't mean don't do that email marketing, but also sending some actual direct mail through the USPS, and let's all be thankful to them right now as essential workers. But right now you can get a lot of extra traction through direct mail as an option. So I think we can talk a lot about these tactics and give you all these ideas for things you could be doing here in this longer term time frame. But we could also skip over the fact that there's ways you need to do these things. And I think it's important to always keep in mind that there are best practices and general principles in marketing that even in a crisis period, and even in using some of these tactics that aren't necessarily completely crazy and no one's ever heard of them before, you really need to make sure you keep in mind some of these important best practices, right? The first, match your medium to your message to your target audience. What does that mean, right? First and foremost, make sure your message takes the crisis at hand into account. Don't assume that you can just skip over the fact that your target audience has an entirely new world going on right now. I think a really, really hard sales message might be the wrong one to go with. Something that sounds too desperate may be the wrong thing to go with. You may even want to, frankly, come out and acknowledge that they're going through it right now, because we all are. So make sure your message is on tone. Make sure your message matches the medium. The type of message you employ in a business letter that you send via direct mail should be very different in form and in format than the message you put out via your Instagram, right? So keep in mind that you need to shift what you're saying and how you're saying it a little bit depending on the actual medium you're using. And also keep that target audience in mind, right? If you're talking to somebody who's 18 years old, that's your target audience for what you're doing. The language needs to change than if you're talking to somebody who's 50 and that's your target audience, no matter what message. So always keep in mind, all right, what am I using? What kind of language is appropriate on that medium? What kind of language is appropriate for this target audience? How do I make sure I'm not being completely cold or oblivious with the global crisis we have going on right now and the stress that everyone's feeling is very, 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 very important. None of these tactics will work if you forget that, right? Also important, although it's true, like I said earlier, that the bread and butter social media like Facebook is blowing up just as much as TikTok. Some of the newest platforms are blowing up. That does not mean that the audiences on those two platforms are the same, right? Keep your audience in mind. Your target audience won't suddenly have completely changed where they go online just because there's a crisis. They might have changed how they use it. They might have changed what they're looking for there, but they won't necessarily completely change their habits with social media. I am not the audience for TikTok. I will not suddenly become the audience for TikTok. So if for some reason I, Leslie Farnsworth, am your target audience, you're not going to find me there. So don't feel like you have to do all the social media because that's where people are today. Kind of keep in mind that different target audiences go different places. Something else to think about is how much this crisis has changed our mindsets and our behavior in terms of how we're using these digital tools and how we're interacting with advertising. So people are, as we talked about earlier, using search engines differently. They're asking different questions than they were asking before. The meaning of some of the words they've used has changed. Again, harking back to that face mask example, right? Their needs have likely changed. People who might not have been looking for a job a month ago are suddenly looking for a job, right? Business owners who may have been flush with cash a month ago are suddenly not. All of these things could have completely changed. College students who were in college a month ago are suddenly trying to do distance learning at home. All of these things are in play, right? So your audiences have changed. Their needs have changed. The way they're using these technologies have changed when you're doing digital types of marketing. So keep that in mind. And then be very aware of the fact that given what's happening and how uncertain everyone feels and how much anxiety we have happening in the world today, people really are seeking for support. They're seeking help. They're seeking positivity. They're seeking community. And if you can provide that right now, it might mean that that hard push sales tactic you were going with, that you were really sure was going to meet your quota for the quarter, is just not going to happen this quarter. And that's okay, right? Because a hard push sales tactic will fail right now, and it could very well harm your brand. But providing support, help, positivity, community could really help your brand build a lot of goodwill and go very, very far in the long run. And that's what we all need to be thinking about in the big picture here. So I think, as we think about these things, we think about how much the world has changed between a month ago and today, and we think about all the ways our target audiences have changed, all the ways even the things we're selling and the products and messages that we're transmitting have needed to change in relation to this crisis. Don't assume, I can't emphasize this enough, do not assume that what worked for you in the past will work for you now, whether that's with your target audience, whether that's with the type of marketing you're doing, whether that's with the messaging you're doing. You really need to evaluate all of it. And although there's no goal in any of these seminars for this to be a sales pitch, if you have marketing experts at your service, please resource them, whether that's internally at your company or key marketing partners you've had in the past. They will really help you look at this a little more clearly, come out of the fog. It's easy to get in a fog right now, especially, and see how to use your time and your money wisely. So couple of final points, and then we'll wrap up, and I'd love to hear what's going on in your world. But I think we should think about, for a second, pause, because all of us are operating in a slight level of, even if it's a little more moderate than it might have been a couple of weeks ago, we're all operating in panic mode at some level. There is a silver lining here, especially for those of us who are marketers or who are businesses, and we're trying to figure out, oh my gosh, this is a whole new order. What do I do with my business? What do I do with my marketing? How do I get in front of my target audience? What in the world can I be doing right now? There is a silver lining. And I think it's worth spending a little time and taking a deep breath and all having a Zen moment and thinking about that. So right now, your target market, whoever that is, whether that's a 15-year-old or a 55-year-old, somebody in business or somebody who's a consumer buying for themselves personally, they are in a lot of ways less distracted than ever. That sounds crazy because all of us are feeling incredibly stressed by this crisis and what's going on. And we've got family members we're worried about. We've got kids at home maybe that we're trying to homeschool or whatever it is, right? So there are certainly distractions, but unlike in normal times where your target audience has got so much going on outside their home and there's so much positivity happening, there's so much marketing they've got going on, they're at the baseball game, and they're helping at the same time while they're sitting in the stadium watching little Timmy play ball, they're helping Jane with her homework, and they're talking to another mom next to them and maybe trying to look at their phone at the same time, right? There's a way right now where they really are stuck at home and they're distracted by the crisis, but they're less distracted by other types of marketing, other types of advertising, and other types of things in their life than ever before. And I think when you link this with the fact that they are stuck at home and they're seeking diversion, right? So they're distracted by the crisis, they're probably distracted by the family situation or worrying about friends or what have you. They're in a way less distracted because they're also seeking diversion, whether that's because they're bored at home, whether that's because they're just overwhelmed with other people in their home, right? Or they're lonely because they're social distancing and there's nobody else there. That can feel very, very alienating in a different kind of way and very stressful in a different kind of way. And then there's just an overall malaise right now. Everyone is feeling stress, everyone's feeling anxiety, and they're all going places online, looking for things at home that will help them get an escape from this crisis, a diversion from this crisis. So when you give it the fact that they're not driving to 18 different kids' events or going on vacation or doing all of these things, those kinds of distractions are removed, but they're trying to find diversions from the current stress they're in. You have actually a lot of opportunity there for people who really want to get the attention of their target audience. And there's also a little bit of a glimmer of people right now, maybe not 2 weeks ago for sure, but we're starting to see it happening now. Maddie and I, even at the end of last week, looking at all the traffic to websites because we have access to a number of different websites. We can kind of see what's going on. There are signs that people are welcoming a glimmer of normalcy. Granted, it's not like it was in February, and it's not going to be like February, but it will certainly mean that they are looking for something different to think about, some kind of normalcy, something kind of fun, something that's not COVID related 100% of the way. So while you need to keep that in mind, that that's a crisis we're all going through, you're not wrong by giving them something to smile about or feel good about, or that sounds a little bit normal right now when everything else feels completely bizarre, right? So tying into big holidays that are going on and referencing those in the family and the community, tying any of that stuff with your products, your services, anything is perfectly welcome. People want to feel like something in the world is happening like it should, right? And that's okay. And the other thing to think about is that unlike the influenza epidemic of 1918, today we have more in-home options as marketers than we ever did in the past, right? So in the past, there wasn't this magic of the internet that could bring so much into the home that we have now. So as business owners, as marketers, as people who are trying to reach our target audience with our message, we have more options than we ever did before in how to reach them. And that's a magical, fantastic thing that we all have to be really, really thankful about right now. So there's hope. I think all of us have sometimes felt a little bit of despair right now, which is completely normal. And I think just having a little moment of going, you know what, in the longer term, bigger picture way, we can actually get a hold of our target audience. They are actually looking for us. They want to hear from us. If as long as we're hitting the right note and hitting the right tone, they want what we have to provide. And I think remembering that and feeling that is important in this kind of crazy time. So